We will start here in chapter 12. Somebody give me a quick summary of chapter 11. What's back in chapter 11 that kind of sets up chapter 12? All right, patriarchs of faith, Ed says, which is exactly right. And why is that helpful and necessary for these Christians? If you back up just a little further in chapter 10, right at the end of chapter 10, what does the writer reveal that explains why he's got chapter 11 in there? Of course, they didn't divide it into chapters like we do, but what's his exhortation starting at about chapter 10, verse 36? Okay. 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 And apparently they've been through a lot, because he says in those previous verses that they had suffered a great deal, sometimes the spoil of their own possessions, and sometimes they've suffered with those who have lost things or even spent time in prison. So he says in verse 36, you have need of endurance. And don't we all? Okay? That's part of what being a Christian is about, is enduring. And then he quotes, as Michael mentions there, verse 37 from Habakkuk 2, this great statement that the righteous one shall live by faith. If he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. So we're going to try to encourage and uplift those who need this help. And chapter 11 supplies a multitude of examples of those who were faithful. What's kind of the defining characteristic of that faith? What does he say about those people who were faithful? What was true of their faith? Can you think of any characteristics? I'm thinking of a couple of things that seem to fit each of those examples that they gave. And it's sort of back there in verse 1 or 2 when he gives this definition, actually, verse 1, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. All those examples, when you start with, well, even Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, what did they all have in common to some extent? I mean, anything. Can you think of anything they had in common? Yeah, faith in God. And faith as a result of what? In at least some of those instances. Yeah, Ian? Okay. Okay, great. So Ian's point is that their faith was demonstrated in actions, and they believed that God was in control. So you've got, certainly in every case, action. By faith, Abraham did this. By faith, Abel offered a greater sacrifice. By faith, in each case, someone did something, and they did something based upon, in many cases, a promise that God had made. Had they realized all of those promises? Think about Abraham. What was true of Abraham? In fact, let me cancel that question. Go a few more verses down, verses 13 to 16, and I think this gets at the heart of what we're describing about each of these. He says in verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised. But why did they persevere? What does he say in verses 13 to 16? Why did they keep going? What was their faith in? Something what? Okay, faith in God. Look down at verse 16. They desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. They hadn't received all of what God promised, but they knew there was something better. Michael? Yeah. Okay. 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 So here are Christians in the same situation in that God has promised them some wonderful things. The writer's gone all the way through this book describing how much better it is that they have what they do, and yet have they realized in totality all that God has to give them? Not at all. In fact, some of them, as we said, are suffering because of their new faith. And what's the temptation? To quit, and in quitting, really going back to what? Yeah, what you had before. We're comfortable there. We know the old law. We know our community and all those kinds of things. Okay, not Kali yet, but he's on his way. Okay. So, chapter 12 is where he's going to pick up here in just a moment. And how does chapter 12 start? Interesting to me. Is it totally disassociated from chapter 11? Not at all. Ian, what's in chapter 12? Okay. Okay. All of these witnesses, and then it seems to me like he gives the greatest witness that he could choose, which is who? Jesus. Looking to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And that's where Kali takes over, right here. We're ready for you. No, we're ready for your instruction here. Primed. Thank you. Oh, and I need to give you the microphone, don't I?
In the car on the YouTube, and this is a wonderful background leading up to what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes at least. Is that good? Okay. In chapter 12, we're going to pick up right where you left off there. And he says, therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Who are the witnesses now going to be? All these people in chapter 11 are the witnesses. And they are a cloud of witnesses, they are called. So let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So what we are going to do is move from the history and the background to his closing in these two chapters, 12 and 13, have to do with the practical ways to overcome the things that he is going to call on them to do and to be as those who would finish the race, those that would endure he used that word endure. I noticed as we were coming up in the car here, you cited a verse in chapter 10 about this idea of endure. And one of the ways to endure is to look at how the patriarchs, those before, endured. And he does that. And now he's going to tell them some things that they're to keep in mind, first of all, and then some things to do in order for them to endure. Notice he says, let us run with endurance. The picture is like a race, a long race, not a sprint, but a, what do you call it, a marathon? Yeah, but a marathon. And so he says, we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. That's all these people that are going to be cheering them on from heaven and receiving them once they arrive there ultimately. What does he mean, do you think, the sin which so easily ensnares us? What is that, do you think? See, he says, lay aside every weight. If you're running a race, you don't want to be encumbered with a backpack on you, or do you? Or with weights. You want to be in a position to go and run as fast as you can, as best you can. So that's the idea there. Then he says, and the sin which so easily ensnares us. What is that? Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Yeah, Ian. Okay, I think that's very well stated. Some think this is a particular sin that would ensnare everybody. So what would that be in this context? What? Failure to follow through? Okay. It might be the lack of faith, or the losing of our faith, or the giving in to sin in a general sense. Some think this is a specific sin to each one of us. Like, for example, there might be something that I have to struggle with in my life. The sin that so easily besets me, you see. And that might be a different sin in your case that is a problem. Something that might be troublesome to me all along might not be troublesome to you at all. I use the illustration sometimes at school of years ago when the Bush Brewery was pumping out odors Y'all remember this, some of you? And some people will go by there, and that smell will drive them crazy, so they have to stop at the next 7-Eleven. And other people go by there, and that smell makes them almost want to, what shall I say in a nice way, regurgitate? Is that a word we should use? Makes them almost sick. So not every sin affects every person in the same way or to the same degree, does it? And maybe even in life that might change, so that something in your youth might challenge you where something else. Let us run with patience the race that's set before us, putting aside every weight and the sin that easily besets us. You see, it might be that that's what he's saying, rather than saying there's one big sin that affects all of us. And that might be the loss of our faith, or giving in to the suffering or the persecutions that we have, or whatever. Y'all see the point we're making there? So we might do that. Well, let's go on. He says in verse 3, consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. So Jesus was persecuted, wasn't he? And we're persecuted. So he says, you have not yet resisted to bloodshed. Verse 4, striving against sin. So, what is he saying here, do you think? In a word or two. You think maybe he's saying you haven't endured as much as the Lord has yet? The Lord endured all this suffering, and you haven't endured that. You have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and he scourges every son whom he receives. So, what does this word chasten mean, do you think? Let me see if I can see where we are. What does chasten mean? Discipline? Maybe. Yes. Right. The word here in the original language could really be translated training. And you used that word, and I liked hearing that from you. The idea is of training. Now we look at this passage and we see chastening. What do you usually think of when you use that word in English, in our experience? Yeah. Harsh. punishment. What did you say here? Reprimand. All right. Reprimand is a good word, I think, too. But more in the idea of correcting and training to do, I think, is the meaning of the word here. Now, training, he's going to say, if you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? Chastening is going to involve discipline, but the focus here is really on the training in the original language, I think. He says, if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. In other words, if you have a good father, he's going to train you. He's going to discipline you. He will rebuke you. In fact, he uses that word, nor be discouraged. Verse 5, my son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him, you see. So you want to learn from God's discipline. And that may come to you, it will come through his word, certainly. It'll come through his providence, maybe, in some ways. And he wants us to be corrected when we need to be corrected. Look at that word is used in verse 9. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us, as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. So what is God's purpose, or when he's training us, what's the goal? What? As God is perfect. The goal is to be like him, isn't it? And so he says, that's what we're running for. And he starts with this idea of training. We have these witnesses, we're running the race, and God has trained us. Now notice verse 11. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. The good teams, let's talk about football for a minute. The good football teams go through training, don't they? Fun? The training? Not at all. That's where the hardest part of the work is. The game is fun. The training is hard. And you can see that in every way. And that's what he's talking about here. Now, if the training involves, let's say for a child at home, if it involves some kind of corporal punishment, is that fun? No, that's not fun either, is it? Either for dad right, George? Or for Everett, if he needs it, right? It's not fun for Dad to get on your case. Really hard. Where he has to lay the Board of Education on the seat of your learning, right? That's not fun. But chastening involves teaching and discipline and all of those kinds of things, you see. So that's what we're talking about. Now then, let's move on, because we want to see several things here that he's in. This is how we are to run our race, how we are to abide in it and continue in it and endure. He says, therefore strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. So you need to prepare yourselves to run. Strengthen your hands. You don't go out and get ready for a football game with your hands like this, do you? Get your hands up. Get with it. Get in the game. And your feeble knees. Strengthen your body. Exercise. Get ready to endure. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. So here he's going to say, these are things you want to avoid, that you'll have to avoid if you're going to endure through faith and become like the Lord. You're not going to be bitter. Verse 15, many become defiled when they become bitter, he says. You're not going to be a fornicator or a profane person. What's a profane person? What does the word profane suggest to you? Yeah. Okay. What is the profane person like then? All right, he may be outwardly wicked. He's going to be the irreverent one, isn't he? The one who is not looking to that which is valuable, and he considers what's valuable to be less than what it is meant to be. That was your idea, wasn't it? So I think that's exactly right. How was Esau like that? Be what? Okay. He had something valuable, didn't he? And he didn't consider it valuable. He was really irreverent with regard to his birthright and to his blessing from God. He didn't value those enough to keep them, to take care of them, and to provide for them, did he? And that's the idea, I think, that he's saying here. Lest any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. That was his loss. You know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. So Esau gave it up and could never get it back, could he? He had given away what was valuable to him. Okay. Ian, did you have something you wanted to say there? I think so. I think that's good. That's right. Well, let's move on very quickly because our time's going to run out on us. Notice he says, you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire, and to blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. For they could not endure. See, there's our word again that keeps coming up. Endurance, endure. They could not endure what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I am exceedingly afraid and trembling. But you have come to Mount Zion and the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, and so on to these others. Notice the contrast he's saying. What is our theme of the book of Hebrews? One preacher I've read said the theme of Hebrews is one word. What would the word be? What? Better. It's the word better. What's he doing here? Yeah. The whole letter has been saying, you want to go for what is better. What is better? Jesus Christ is better. He's better than the angels. He's better than the priests. He's better than all of it. You've come to Jesus. You've come to that which is new and that which is better. You have come to Mount Zion, better, spiritual than Mount Sinai was for the Jews, right? And to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven. Who are the firstborn? They're the people of Christ. This is a plural word, incidentally. You should know that. This word firstborn is plural, referring to them. Sometimes the word firstborn refers to Christ. Here, this is the church he's referring to here, the church of the firstborn ones, composed of those who are born in Christ, you see. The firstborn who are registered in heaven, to God the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. So they had come into the company of those who were cheering them on, They were in the company of the angels. They were in God's company. They were in Christ's company. And all the faithful for all time. The other Christians, you see. To Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling. So why did they need to endure? Because they had better things than what had ever been offered to mankind before. And how would they do it? By remembering all that and keeping it in their faith. So then he says, all right, then hear the heavenly voice. This will see you through. See that you do not refuse him who speaks. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, who was that? In this context, what does it seem to point to here? Who would have spoken to them from the mount? Moses. Moses, I think, is who he's talking about here. Much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. Now this, yet once more, indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken, as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. For our God is a consuming fire. We have faith in a great Lord who blesses us, who loves us, who cares for us, who sacrificed himself for us, don't we? And this is so much greater than anything before. He's greater than Moses, and he's greater than all others. So in chapter 13, which we may need to pick up in a sermon or something here a little later on, let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. That's an interesting passage of Scripture. What is an angel? A messenger from God. And it might be that might come to us in human form, you think? In such a way that God has, by his providence, sent someone to us to be with us, to help us to be better. And we need to be kind to the strangers that come into our midst, because they might be sent by God, either for their benefit or for ours as we go along. Of course, we don't know much about the angels that God has serving him in his capacity, a multitude of angels. And we need to believe in the angels, but we would like to know more about them, wouldn't we, as we go? Remember the prisoners as if chained with them. See what he's doing? He's in his postscripts here at the end of the lessons of the book of Hebrews. He's telling them some things they should be careful to do that will help them to overcome the desire to leave the faith. And so he says, let brotherly love continue. Entertain strangers. Don't forget to do that. Remember the prisoners. Why? Well, you're still in the body. You may be a prisoner yourself before this is over. The Christians were enduring persecution, weren't they? Marriage is honorable. Don't become immoral in your life. Let your conduct be without covetousness. You see, he's just got a list of those righteous activities that we ought to be involved in, so that we can boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Okay? And then he continues giving other instructions as he goes on, and you can read all of those. Was that the second bell?